The morning mist clung to the rolling hills of Cedar Valley, Tennessee, as Marcus Thompson stepped out of his weathered farmhouse. What he discovered in his chicken coop that dawn would transform his failing farm into a multi-million-dollar empire. But it all started with a hungry girl, a handful of stolen eggs, and a decision that would change both their lives forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Thompson had always believed that hard work would eventually pay off. At 34, he possessed the calloused hands and sun-weathered face of someone who had spent his entire adult life wrestling with the unforgiving Tennessee soil. His grandfather's farm, once a thriving operation that supplied eggs and poultry to 3 counties, had been bleeding money for the past 5 years. Every morning brought new challenges, feed costs that seemed to climb higher each month, equipment that broke down at the worst possible moments, and a bank loan that hung over his head like a storm cloud ready to burst. The Thompson farm sprawled across 200 acres of rolling pasture land, dotted with aging chicken coops and barns that desperately needed repair. Marcus had inherited the property 3 years ago when his grandfather passed, along with debts that seemed to multiply faster than the chickens he raised. His wife Sarah had left him 18 months earlier, taking their 7-year-old daughter, Emma, with her to live with her sister in Nashville. She couldn't handle the uncertainty anymore, the sleepless nights wondering if they'd lose everything, the constant arguments about money that seemed to consume their marriage. Now Marcus lived alone in the sprawling farmhouse, rattling around rooms that once echoed with family laughter. The silence was deafening, broken only by the morning crow of roosters and the gentle clucking of hens going about their daily routines. He had exactly 347 laying hens, a number he knew by heart because he counted them obsessively, knowing that each bird represented a small source of income in his desperate fight to keep the farm afloat. The previous night had been particularly difficult. Marcus had spent hours at his kitchen table, surrounded by bills and bank statements, trying to figure out how to make the numbers work. The mortgage payment was due in 2 weeks, and he was short by $800. His usual egg buyers, 2 local grocery stores and a small restaurant chain, had been consistent, but the profit margins were razor-thin. After paying for feed, utilities, fuel, and basic maintenance, there was barely enough left to cover his personal expenses, let alone set aside money for emergencies or improvements. Sleep had eluded him until nearly 3 in the morning, and when his alarm rang at 5:30, Marcus felt like he was moving through molasses. He pulled on his work boots, grabbed his worn baseball cap, and stepped out into the cool morning air. The October dawn was crisp and clear, with that particular quality of light that made the autumn leaves on the distant oak trees look like they were on fire. His daily routine never varied. First stop was always the main chicken coop, a long, low building that housed most of his laying hens. He would check the automatic water systems, ensure the feed dispensers were working properly, and then begin the process of collecting eggs. It was meditative work, moving from nest box to nest box, gently gathering the smooth, warm eggs and placing them carefully in his collection baskets. But something was wrong this morning. Marcus noticed it immediately as he approached the co-op. The wire fencing around the outdoor run area had been disturbed. Several chickens were wandering freely in the yard, pecking at the grass with unusual agitation. The gate to the run was slightly ajar, swinging gently in the morning breeze. His heart began to race as possibilities flooded his mind. Foxes, raccoons, or worse, someone deliberately trying to sabotage his operation. He quickened his pace, pushing through the gate and into the coop itself. The familiar smell of hay and chicken feed was mixed with something else, the unmistakable scent of human presence. Someone had been here recently. Marcus's eyes adjusted to the dim interior lighting, and he began his inspection. Several nest boxes had been emptied completely, far more than would be normal from natural predation. The chickens themselves seemed skittish, more so than usual, clustering together in the far corner of the coop. It was then that he heard it. A soft rustling sound coming from behind the feed storage area at the back of the coop. Marcus grabbed the pitchfork from its hook on the wall and moved cautiously toward the sound. His boots crunched softly on the hay-covered floor as he approached the shadows. "I know someone's back there," he called out, trying to keep his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "Come out slowly and we can talk about this." The rustling stopped completely. For a moment, Marcus wondered if he had imagined the whole thing, if stress and lack of sleep were making him paranoid. Then, slowly, a figure emerged from behind the towering bags of chicken feed. It was a girl, probably no more than 16 or 17 years old, with tangled dark hair that hung past her shoulders and clothes that looked like she had been living rough for weeks. Her jeans were torn at the knees and stained with mud. Her oversized flannel shirt hung loose on her thin frame, and her sneakers had holes that revealed glimpses of bare feet underneath. But it was her eyes that struck Marcus most forcefully, large, dark, and filled with a mixture of defiance and desperate hunger that reminded him of a cornered animal. In her hands, she clutched a makeshift pouch created from what looked like an old pillowcase, and Marcus could see the distinctive shapes of eggs bulging against the fabric. She had obviously been here for a while, systematically collecting from his nest boxes with the skill of someone who knew what she was doing. "Please don't call the police," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying a strength that belied her obvious vulnerability. "I can pay you back. I just needed something to eat." Marcus lowered the pitchfork but didn't set it aside completely. His mind was racing, trying to process this unexpected situation. Rural Tennessee had its share of transients and homeless individuals, especially since the economic downturn had hit the region particularly hard. But most of them were older, weathered men who rode the freight trains or lived in camps along the river bottoms. This girl was different, young, obviously intelligent despite her circumstances, and surprisingly composed for someone who had just been caught stealing. "How long have you been taking my eggs?" Marcus asked, his voice gentler than he had intended. Girl's eyes darted toward the co-op entrance, clearly calculating her chances of making a run for it. "This is the first time," she said, but something in her tone suggested that wasn't entirely true. Marcus studied her face, noting the way she held herself with a careful balance between submission and rebellion. Despite her obvious hunger and desperation, there was a dignity about her that impressed him. She wasn't begging or making excuses, just stating facts and accepting whatever consequences might come. "What's your name?" he asked. "Riley," she said after a moment's hesitation. "Riley Chun." The name surprised him. In this rural part of Tennessee, Asian surnames were uncommon, and her features suggested mixed heritage that told a story of complexity. He couldn't begin to guess at. "Well, Riley Chen, you've got me in a bit of a predicament here," Marcus said, setting the pitchfork aside completely and crossing his arms. "I'm running a business, not a charity. These eggs represent money I need to keep this place running. But I also can't just ignore the fact that you're obviously in trouble." Riley's grip on the pillowcase tightened, but she didn't try to run. "I understand if you need to call the police. I've been in worse situations." Something in the way she said it, with a matter-of-fact acceptance that spoke of hard experience, made Marcus's chest tighten. This wasn't some privileged teenager acting out or looking for adventure. This was someone who had been pushed to the margins of society and was doing whatever it took to survive. "How many eggs do you have there?" he asked. Riley looked down at her makeshift bag. 18. Marcus did quick mental math. At his current wholesale prices, 18 eggs represented about $4.50 in lost revenue. Not exactly a fortune, but when you were counting every penny, it added up quickly. "Where are you staying?" he asked. "Around," Riley said evasively. "That's not an answer." Are you sleeping rough? Riley's jaw tightened, and Marcus could see her internal struggle between honesty and self-preservation. Finally, she nodded slightly. How long? 3 weeks, she admitted. Marcus felt something shift inside his chest. 3 weeks of sleeping outdoors in October, with nighttime temperatures dipping into the 40s. 3 weeks of scrounging for food, probably going hungry more often than not. 3 weeks of danger and uncertainty that no teenager should have to endure. What happened to your family? He asked quietly. Riley's expression hardened. That's not your business. Fair enough, Marcus said. But if you're going to be stealing from me, I think I have a right to understand why. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the hay-strewn floor of the chicken coop. Marcus could hear the gentle sounds of the hens going about there. Morning routines, the distant lowing of cattle from a neighboring farm, and the soft whisper of wind through the oak trees that surrounded his property. It was peaceful, normal, in stark contrast to the extraordinary situation unfolding inside the co-op. My mom died last year, Riley said finally, her voice so quiet Marcus had to strain to hear her. Cancer. We didn't have insurance, and the medical bills ate up everything we had. After the funeral, I went to live with my aunt in Memphis, but her boyfriend didn't want me around. We had a big fight about a month ago, and I left. Why didn't you go to social services? There are programs to help kids in your situation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Riley's laugh was bitter. Have you ever been in the system? Foster care isn't exactly a fairy tale, especially for someone my age. Most families want cute little kids, not teenagers with attitude problems. I figured I could make it on my own until I turned 18 next summer. Then everything would be easier. Marcus absorbed this information, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a heavy blanket. This girl, Riley, represented everything that was wrong with a system that let children fall through the cracks. But she also represented something else, something he couldn't quite put his finger on yet. You said you could pay me back, he said. How exactly? Were you planning to do that? Riley straightened, and Marcus caught a glimpse of the fierce determination that had probably kept her alive these past few weeks. I'm good with animals. I worked at a pet store in Memphis before everything went bad. I know about chickens, about taking care of them. I could work for you, earn what I owe, and maybe a little extra. Marcus considered this. He certainly could use help around the farm, especially with the physical demands of maintaining the property starting to wear on his aging body. But hiring someone meant paperwork, payroll taxes, workers' compensation insurance, complications. He couldn't afford. I can't officially hire you, he said. Too much red tape, too many legal issues. But maybe we can work something out unofficially. Riley's eyes brightened slightly, the first hint of hope Marcus had seen since she emerged. From behind the feed bags. There's an old bunkhouse behind the main barn, Marcus continued, thinking out loud. It's not much, but it has a bed, a wood stove, and running water. If you're willing to work for room and board, and maybe a little money, we might be able to help each other out. What kind of work? Riley asked, suspicion creeping back into her voice. Farm work, feeding chickens, collecting eggs, cleaning coops, general maintenance. It's not glamorous, and it's not easy, but it's honest work. Riley was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing her options. Marcus could almost see her mind working, calculating risks and benefits, trying to determine if this was a genuine offer or some kind of trap. Why would you help me? She asked finally. You don't know anything about me. I could be dangerous. Or crazy or a drug addict. Marcus smiled slightly. Are you any of those things? No, Riley said firmly. Then we'll figure the rest out as we go along. But I have some conditions. Riley tensed, obviously expecting the worst. First, no more stealing. If you need something, you ask. Second, you follow my rules and my schedule. This is a working farm, not a vacation resort. Third, if you decide this isn't working out, you give me 24 hours notice before you leave. I don't want to wake up one morning and find you've disappeared in the night. That's it. Riley asked, clearly surprised by the reasonable nature of his demands. That's it. Oh, and one more thing. You keep those eggs you already took. Consider them an advance and your first week's wages. For the first time since their confrontation began, Riley smiled. It transformed her entire face, revealing glimpses of the intelligent, spirited young woman hiding beneath the layers of wariness and desperation. Deal, she said, extending her hand to shake on their agreement. As Marcus grasped her thin, calloused hand. He had no idea that this moment would mark the beginning of a partnership that would revolutionize not just his struggling farm, but the entire agricultural industry in their region. Riley Chun, the hungry girl he had found stealing eggs from his chicken coop, possessed knowledge and instincts that would prove more valuable than anything he could have imagined. But first, they had chickens to feed and eggs to collect, and a farm to save from bankruptcy. Marcus led Riley across the farmyard toward the old bunkhouse, their footsteps crunching on the gravel path that wound between the various outbuildings. The October sun had climbed higher, burning off the morning mist and revealing the full scope of the property. Riley walked slightly behind him, clutching her pillowcase of eggs, her eyes constantly scanning the surroundings with the hyper-awareness of someone who had learned to assess every new environment for potential threats and opportunities. The bunkhouse sat about 50 yards behind the main barn, a modest structure that Marcus's grandfather had built in the 1960s to house seasonal workers during the farm's more prosperous days. It hadn't been occupied in over a decade, and Marcus winced as he approached it, seeing the building through Riley's eyes. The wooden siding had weathered to a dull gray, several shingles were missing from the roof, and the small front porch sagged slightly under the weight of accumulated neglect. "It's not the Ritz," Marcus said as he fumbled with the rusty padlock on the door. "But it's warm and dry, which is more than you've had lately." Riley didn't respond, but he could sense her taking mental inventory of everything around her. When the door finally swung open with a protesting creak, she followed him inside and stood quietly in the center of the single room, absorbing the space that might become her temporary home. The interior was sparse but functional. A twin bed frame sat against one wall, topped with a bare mattress that looked reasonably clean. A small table and 2 chairs occupied the space near the single window, and a compact wood-burning stove dominated the far corner. A door at the back led to a tiny bathroom with a shower, toilet, and sink. The walls were bare wood paneling, and the floor was covered with worn linoleum that had probably been installed sometime in the 1980s. "The stove works," Marcus said, opening the firebox to check the condition of the interior. "There's a cord of seasoned oak stacked outside. Should be enough to keep you warm through the winter if it comes to that. Water heater is propane, and the tank's about half full. I'll show you how to light the pilot if it goes out." Riley walked to the window and looked out across the farm. From this vantage point, she could see the chicken coops, the main barn, and beyond that, rolling pastures, dotted with the dark shapes of cattle. In the distance, the Tennessee hills rose like green waves against the horizon. "It's beautiful," she said quietly, the first purely positive comment she had made since their encounter in the co-op. Marcus joined her at the window. "My grandfather always said this was the prettiest view on the whole property. He used to sit out on that porch in the evenings, smoking his pipe and watching the sunset." "What happened to him?" Riley asked. "Heart attack 3 years ago. He was 84, still putting in 12-hour days right up until the end. The doctor said his heart just wore out." Marcus's voice carried a mixture of admiration and sadness. "He built this place from nothing. Started with 20 acres and a dozen chickens back in 1962, and by the time I was born, he was supplying eggs to half the county. Riley turned from the window to face him. And now? Marcus sighed. Now I'm barely keeping my head above water. Feed costs have tripled in the past 5 years. Equipment keeps breaking down, and the big commercial operations can undercut my prices. On volume, I keep thinking I should just sell the place and find a job in town. But double quotes. But you can't let go, Riley finished. Something like that. Marcus looked around the bunkhouse, remembering the seasonal workers who had lived here over the years, migrant laborers, college kids earning summer money, drifters who stayed just long enough to earn traveling money. This place has always been about more than just making money. It's about providing something essential, something people need to survive. There's dignity in that. Riley nodded as if she understood completely. My mom used to say that everyone needs to feel useful. That's what she missed most when she got too sick to work, feeling like she was contributing something to the world. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Then Marcus clapped his hands together, the sound sharp in the quiet room. Well, standing around isn't going to get the work done. Let me show you around the operation, and we can figure out where you'll fit in best. Over the next 2 hours, Marcus gave Riley a comprehensive tour of the farm. They started with the main chicken coop, where she demonstrated an impressive knowledge of poultry behavior and care. She immediately noticed that several of the hens showed signs of stress, ruffled feathers, reduced egg production, aggressive pecking at each other, and correctly identified overcrowding as a contributing factor. You've got about 60 birds in a space that should hold 45, she observed, watching the chickens move around their enclosure. They need more room to establish proper social hierarchies. When they're cramped like this, the dominant hens get more aggressive, which stresses the whole flock. Marcus was impressed. You really did work at a pet store. For 2 years, Riley confirmed. The owner was an old Vietnamese guy who knew everything about animals. He taught me that stressed animals don't produce well, whether they're laying eggs or having babies or just trying to stay healthy. You've got to think about their psychological needs, not just their physical ones. They moved on to the other outbuildings, the feed storage barn, the equipment shed, the smaller coops that house different breeds of chickens. Riley asked intelligent questions about feeding schedules, veterinary care, predator control, and marketing strategies. Marcus found himself explaining aspects of the operation that he had never articulated before, seeing his own farm through fresh eyes. How many eggs do you collect per day on average? Riley asked as they walked between the coops. About 210, Marcus replied. Some days more, some less, depending on the weather and the season. Riley was quiet for a moment, clearly doing calculations in her head. At current market prices, that's about $52 a day in gross revenue. Times 7 days a week, times 52 weeks a year. You're looking at roughly $19,000 in annual egg sales. Marcus stopped walking and stared at her. You just did that math in your head? Riley shrugged as if rapid mental arithmetic was perfectly normal. I'm good with numbers, always have been. My mom used to joke that I should become an accountant. But I like working with animals better. What else can you calculate off the top of your head? Well, you said you've got 347 laying hens. If each hen eats about a quarter pound of feed per day, that's roughly 87 pounds of feed daily. At current feed prices, let's say about 40 cents per pound, you're spending about $35 a day on feed. That doesn't include supplements, medications, bedding, or any of your other operating costs. Marcus felt a strange mixture of excitement and concern. This homeless teenager was demonstrating analytical skills that surpassed his own, and he had been running this operation for years. So what's your assessment? He asked. Is this place salvageable? Riley considered the question seriously. Your operating at a loss, but not by much. The problem isn't your efficiency, it's your scale. You need either more chickens producing more eggs, or you need to find ways to add value to what you're already producing, such as specialty markets, organic certification, free-range labeling, direct sales to consumers who are willing to pay premium prices for higher quality products. The big commercial operations compete on volume and low prices, but they can't compete on quality and personal relationships. As they walked back toward the farmhouse, Marcus's mind was racing. Riley's observations weren't revolutionary, but they were delivered with a clarity and confidence that made him see possibilities he had been too close to recognize. Maybe his farm wasn't dying, maybe it was just evolving, waiting for the right catalyst to transform into something better. "Are you hungry?" he asked as they reached the back porch of the farmhouse. Riley nodded, suddenly looking every bit the undernourished teenager she was. "Come on in. I'll make us some lunch, and we can talk about what comes next." The farmhouse kitchen was spacious, but dated, with appliances that had seen better decades and countertops that bore the scars of countless meals prepared over the years. Marcus pulled ingredients from the refrigerator, eggs naturally, along with cheese, bacon, and fresh vegetables from his small garden. As he cooked, Riley sat at the kitchen table and continued her analysis of the farm's operations. "You mentioned that your wife left," she said carefully. "Was the farm part of that decision?" Marcus paused in his scrambling of eggs. It wasn't a subject he discussed often, but something about Riley's directness made evasion seem pointless. "Sarah couldn't handle the uncertainty," he said finally. "She grew up in town, never really understood the farming life. When my grandfather died, and we inherited all his debts along with the property, she wanted me to sell everything and find a regular job with a steady paycheck. When I refused, things got difficult. Do you regret staying?" Marcus considered the question as he played their lunch. "Some days. When the bills pile up and the equipment breaks down and I'm working 16-hour days just to stay even, I wonder if she was right. But then I walk out in the morning and see the sunrise over the pastures, or I watch the chickens going about their business, and I remember why this matters." Riley accepted the plate of food he offered and took a bite before responding. "My mom always said that some people are meant to build things, and some people are meant to maintain things that other people built. She said both jobs were important, but you had to figure out which one you were meant to do." "And which one are you meant to do?" Marcus asked. Riley smiled, the expression transforming her face again. "I'm a builder. Always have been. Even when I was little, I was the kid who took apart toys to see how they worked, then tried to put them back together in new ways." After lunch, they returned to the practical matters of Riley's employment. Marcus showed her how to operate the automatic egg collection system, explained the feeding schedules for different groups of chickens, and walked her through the daily cleaning routines that kept the coop sanitary and the birds healthy. Riley absorbed everything quickly, asking questions that demonstrated she was thinking several steps ahead. By late afternoon, she had taken over the evening feeding routine completely, moving through the coops with an efficiency that impressed Marcus. The chickens seemed to respond well to her presence, clustering around her feet and allowing her to handle them without the flapping and squawking that often accompanied his own interactions with the birds. "They like you," Marcus observed, watching Riley check each chicken for signs of illness or injury. "Animals can sense when someone understands them," Riley replied, gently examining a hen that seemed lethargic. "This one might be getting sick. See how she's holding her head low and not moving around much? Could be respiratory infection, or maybe she just ate something that disagreed with her. We should keep an eye on her for the next couple of days." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the farmyard, Marcus and Riley stood outside the main coop and watched the chickens settling in for the night. It had been an extraordinary day. 12 hours ago, Marcus had been facing his problems alone, convinced that his farm was slowly dying. Now he had a partner, someone who not only understood the challenges he faced but seemed genuinely excited about finding solutions. "I want you to know," Marcus said quietly, "this arrangement isn't charity. You've already shown me more about my own operation than I learned in the past year. If this works out, it's going to be because we're both getting something valuable out of it." Riley nodded. "I understand, and Marcus, thank you for taking a chance on me. A lot of people wouldn't have." As they parted ways for the evening, Marcus returning to his empty farmhouse, Riley heading to her new home in the bunkhouse. Neither of them could have predicted that this first day of partnership would be remembered as the foundation stone of an agricultural empire that would eventually span 3 states and employ hundreds of people. But that night, as Riley built her first fire in the wood stove, and Marcus sat at his kitchen table reviewing his ledger books, both of them felt something they hadn't experienced in a long time: hope for the future. 3 weeks had passed since Riley Chen first emerged from behind the feed bags in Marcus Thompson's chicken coop, and the transformation was already visible across the farm. What had started as a desperate arrangement between a struggling farmer and a homeless teenager was evolving into something neither of them had anticipated: a genuine business partnership built on complementary skills and shared determination. Riley had thrown herself into farm life with an intensity that both impressed and occasionally worried Marcus. She was up before dawn every morning, moving through the coops with systematic precision, collecting eggs, checking on sick birds, and maintaining detailed records of production and health issues. Her notebook, a composition book she had purchased with her first week's wages, was filled with meticulous observations about individual chickens, feed consumption patterns, and productivity metrics that Marcus had never thought to track. The improvement in the flock's overall health was undeniable. Riley had reorganized the housing arrangements, reducing overcrowding and establishing better ventilation systems using materials they already had on the property. She had identified and isolated 3 birds showing early signs of respiratory infection, preventing what could have been a costly outbreak that might have spread through the entire population. Most importantly, daily egg production had increased from an average of 210 to nearly 260, a 24% improvement that translated directly to increased revenue. But it was Riley's ideas about expanding the operation that truly captured Marcus's attention. During their evening discussions, usually conducted over dinner in the farmhouse kitchen, she would sketch out plans for diversification and growth that demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of agricultural economics and market dynamics. "We need to think beyond just selling eggs to grocery stores," Riley said one evening, spreading her notebook open on the kitchen table. "Look at these numbers. We're getting about $2.50 per dozen wholesale, but consumers are paying $4 or more retail. That markup is going to middlemen who add no real value to the product." Marcus studied her carefully drawn charts and graphs. "Direct sales mean more work. We'd need permits, insurance, probably a whole different set of regulations to deal with." "True. But the profit margins justify the extra effort. If we could sell just 30% of our production directly to consumers at retail prices, we'd increase our gross revenue by almost 40%. Riley's pen moved across the page, calculating figures with practiced ease. Plus, direct sales create customer relationships. People who know where their food comes from and trust the producer will pay premium prices for quality. Marcus leaned back in his chair, considering the possibilities. Where would we sell them? We're pretty remote out here. Riley smiled, the expression that had become familiar over the past few weeks. Farmers markets, obviously, but also restaurants looking for local suppliers, specialty grocery stores that cater to health-conscious consumers, even online sales. With home delivery, the infrastructure for small-scale direct marketing has never been better. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a vehicle turning into their driveway, headlights sweeping across the kitchen window. Marcus glanced at the clock, nearly 8 in the evening, too late for casual visitors. He walked to the window and peered out, recognizing the distinctive shape of his neighbor Jim Crawford's pickup truck. Jim Crawford owned the adjacent property, a larger operation that focused primarily on beef cattle with a small side business in hay production. He was a good neighbor, the kind of man who would lend equipment in emergencies and help with major projects that required extra hands. But his unannounced evening visit suggested something more urgent than social conversation. Marcus opened the front door as Jim approached the porch, noting the serious expression on his weathered face. Jim was in his early 60s, a man who had spent his entire life working the land and possessed the kind of practical wisdom that came from decades of experience with both success and failure. "Evening, Marcus," Jim said, touching the brim of his baseball cap. "Sorry to bother you so late, but I wanted to talk to you about something before it gets around to other folks." "Come on in," Marcus replied, stepping aside to let his neighbor enter. "Riley and I were just going over some business plans. You remember Riley?" Jim nodded to Riley, who had looked up from her notebooks but remained seated at the kitchen table. "Young lady, I've been hearing interesting things about the changes you two have been making around here. Coffee?" Marcus offered, but Jim waved him off. "This won't take long. I wanted to give you a heads up. There's been some talk at the feed store about your operation, specifically about your new employee." Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the anxiety that came from knowing that small rural communities thrived on gossip and speculation. "What kind of talk?" "Nothing malicious," Jim said quickly. "Mostly positive, actually. People have noticed that your egg production is up, that your chickens look healthier, that you seem to have more energy than you've had since Sarah left. But there are questions about the girl's background, where she came from, whether she's legal to work." Riley's pen had stopped moving across her notebook, and Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders. They had both known this conversation would come eventually, in a community where everyone knew everyone else's business. A mysterious teenager appearing out of nowhere was bound to attract attention. "Riley's situation is complicated," Marcus sighed carefully. "But she's not doing anything illegal, and neither am I." Jim held up his hands in a peacekeeping gesture. "I'm not questioning your judgment, Marcus. Hell, from what I can see, hiring her was the smartest thing you've done in years." But Bill Henderson was asking pointed questions about work permits and tax records, and you know how he gets when he thinks someone's cutting corners. Bill Henderson was the local county extension agent, a bureaucrat who took his regulatory responsibilities seriously and had a reputation for making life difficult for farmers who didn't follow procedures to the letter. If he was asking questions about Riley's employment status, it could lead to complications that Marcus couldn't afford. "What do you think I should do?" Marcus asked. Jim glanced at Riley, then back to Marcus. "Get ahead of it. Document everything properly, make sure all your paperwork is in order, and maybe consider making the arrangement more official, if that's possible." After Jim left, Marcus and Riley sat in the kitchen, both lost in thought. The practical reality of their situation had been easy to ignore when they were focused on the day-to-day work of improving the farm, but the outside world had a way of intruding on even the most isolated operations. "I could leave," Riley said quietly. "I don't want to cause problems for you." "You're not causing problems," Marcus replied firmly. "You're solving them. But we do need to figure out how to make this arrangement sustainable long-term." Riley closed her notebook and looked directly at him. "There's something I haven't told you, about my situation, I mean." Marcus waited, sensing that whatever she was about to reveal would be important. "I'm not actually 17, Riley said. "I'm 19. I'll be 20 in December." Marcus absorbed this information, trying to understand its implications. "Why did you let me think you were younger?" Because people are more sympathetic to a desperate teenager than they are to a young adult who should be able to take care of herself. And because I was scared that if you knew I was legally an adult, you might expect different things from me. The admission changed the dynamic between them in subtle ways. Riley wasn't a child in need of protection. She was a young woman who had made conscious choices about her life and was dealing with the consequences of those decisions. It also meant that the legal complications of her employment were potentially simpler than Marcus had assumed. "Are you willing to make this official?" Marcus asked. "Proper employment contract, payroll taxes, all the paperwork that goes with running a legitimate business?" Riley nodded without hesitation. "I want to be here legitimately. I want to build something that lasts." Over the following week, Marcus and Riley worked with a local attorney to establish a formal employment relationship. The process was more complex than either of them had anticipated, involving business licenses, workers' compensation insurance, and a detailed contract that outlined Riley's responsibilities and compensation. But when the paperwork was finally complete, both of them felt a sense of relief and commitment that went beyond their original handshake agreement. The legal formalization of their partnership coincided with their first major expansion project. Riley had convinced Marcus to invest in a mobile chicken coop, a wheeled structure that could be moved around the pasture, allowing the birds to forage on fresh ground while their waste fertilized different areas of the property. The concept was simple but innovative, combining the benefits of free-range farming with practical land management. Building the mobile co-op became a collaborative project that showcased both of their skills. Marcus contributed his carpentry experience and knowledge of construction techniques, while Riley designed the internal layout and ventilation systems based on her understanding of chicken behavior. Working together in the evenings and on weekends, they created a structure that was both functional and elegant, incorporating features that neither of them could have conceived alone. The first flock of 30 hens moved into the mobile coop on a crisp November morning, and the results were immediately apparent. The birds were more active, their feathers brighter, and their egg production notably higher than their counterparts in the stationary coops. More importantly, customers began to notice the difference in the eggs themselves: richer yolks, firmer whites, and a flavor that reflected the varied diet of truly free-ranging chickens. Riley's marketing instincts proved as sharp as her animal husbandry skills. She designed simple but attractive labels for their egg cartons, emphasizing the farm's history, their commitment to animal welfare, and the superior nutrition of pasture-raised eggs. She established relationships with 3 local restaurants, convincing their chefs to try their products and ultimately securing contracts for regular deliveries at premium prices. But it was her proposal for their next expansion that truly demonstrated the scope of her vision for the farm's future. "Heritage breeds," Riley announced one evening, spreading photographs and research materials across the kitchen table. "We need to diversify beyond standard commercial laying hens." Marcus examined the images of exotic-looking chickens, birds with dramatic plumage, unusual sizes, and names he had never heard before. "What's the market for something like this?" "Niche but profitable," Riley replied. "These breeds produce eggs with unique characteristics, different colors, sizes, nutritional profiles. Blue eggs from Americaeas, cream-colored eggs from Buff Orpingtons, extra-large brown eggs from Jersey Giants. Restaurants love them for presentation, and consumers will pay double or triple the price for something special. How much would we need to invest to get started?" Riley had already done the calculations. "About $3,000 for breeding stock and specialized housing. We could start small, maybe 50 birds total across 4 different breeds, and scale up based on demand. The key is to position ourselves as specialists in rare and heritage varieties, not just another egg producer trying to compete on volume." Marcus studied the numbers Riley had prepared, impressed once again by her thoroughness and attention to detail. The investment was significant but manageable, and the potential returns were compelling. More importantly, the project would differentiate their operation from the generic commercial farms that dominated the regional market. "There's one more thing," Riley said, her voice carrying a note of excitement that Marcus had learned to associate with her most ambitious ideas. "I've been researching agritourism opportunities. Farm tours, educational programs, maybe even a small farm store where people can buy eggs, vegetables, and other local products directly from us." The concept was intriguing but represented a fundamental shift in how Marcus thought about his property. Instead of just a production facility, the farm would become a destination, a place where urban consumers could connect with agriculture and understand where their food came from. That would mean opening our operation to strangers, dealing with liability issues, probably needing permits for public access, Marcus said, thinking through the practical implications. "All true," Riley acknowledged. "But it also means creating multiple revenue streams that aren't dependent on commodity prices or wholesale contracts. People pay good money for authentic experiences, especially families with children who want to teach their kids about farming." As November progressed, their partnership continued to evolve and deepen. What had begun as a desperate arrangement between two people trying to solve immediate problems was becoming a genuine collaboration between equals, each contributing unique strengths to their shared enterprise. Riley's youth and energy balanced Marcus's experience and stability, while her innovative thinking challenged his traditional approaches to farming. But perhaps most importantly, both of them had found something they hadn't realized they were missing, a sense of purpose that went beyond mere survival. They weren't just trying to keep a struggling farm afloat anymore. They were building something new, something that could serve as a model for how small-scale agriculture could thrive in an increasingly corporate-dominated industry. The foundation of their empire was being laid one egg, one innovation, one satisfied customer at a time. February brought the kind of bitter cold that made every farm task a test of endurance. But Marcus Thompson had never felt more energized. The Nashville restaurant contract had launched flawlessly, with their first weekly delivery earning praise from head chefs, who described their eggs as transformative and unlike anything available through conventional suppliers. More importantly, the revenue stream was exactly what Riley had projected, providing the financial stability that allowed them to reinvest in expansion without the constant anxiety about meeting basic expenses. Riley had thrown herself into the logistics of their growing operation with characteristic intensity. She had developed a computerized tracking system that monitored individual flock performance, feed conversion efficiency, and customer preferences with scientific precision. Her laptop, a refurbished machine she had purchased with her first substantial paycheck, was constantly open on the kitchen table, displaying spreadsheets and databases that would have impressed agricultural extension agents. The real breakthrough came not from their expanding egg production, but from an unexpected conversation with Dr. Patricia Valdez, a poultry science professor from the University of Tennessee, who had heard about their operation through academic networks. Dr. Valdez arrived on a gray February morning, driving a university truck and carrying equipment that looked more appropriate for a research laboratory than a working farm. "I understand you're achieving remarkable production efficiency with heritage breeds," Dr. Valdez said as Riley led her through the coops. "My graduate students have been analyzing commercial poultry operations throughout the Southeast, and your numbers are consistently appearing as statistical outliers." Riley was intrigued but cautious. Academic interest could lead to valuable partnerships, but it could also bring unwanted scrutiny and regulation. What kind of outliers? Feed conversion ratios that exceed industry standards by 15 to 20%. Disease resistance that eliminates the need for routine antibiotic supplementation. Egg production consistency that rivals commercial operations with twice your infrastructure investment. Dr. Valdez paused to examine one of their Americana hens, noting the bird's bright eyes and healthy demeanor. "Frankly, we're trying to understand how you're achieving these results." As they toured the facilities, Riley found herself explaining techniques she had developed through observation and experimentation rather than formal training. Her approach to nutrition management combined traditional practices with innovations, born from careful attention to individual bird behavior and preferences. She had created feeding schedules that varied by breed, season, and production phase, optimizing each flock's diet for maximum health and productivity. Dr. Valdez was particularly interested in Riley's rotational grazing system. The mobile coops allowed their chickens to forage on fresh pasture every few days, but Riley had refined the process to account for soil conditions, grass varieties, and weather patterns that most farmers ignored. "You're essentially practicing regenerative agriculture without realizing it," Dr. Valdez observed. "Your chickens are improving soil health while producing superior eggs. The carbon sequestration alone could qualify you for environmental credits that add significant value to your operation." The concept of environmental credits was new to both Marcus and Riley, but Dr. Valdez explained how progressive farmers were earning additional revenue by documenting their positive environmental impact. Carbon sequestration, biodiversity enhancement, and water quality improvement could all generate income streams that supplemented traditional agricultural sales. "Would you be interested in participating in a research partnership?" Dr. Valdez asked as their tour concluded. The university would provide technical support and graduate student researchers to help document your practices and measure their environmental impact. "In exchange, we'd like to use your farm as a demonstration site for sustainable agriculture techniques." Riley looked to Marcus, who nodded almost imperceptibly. The partnership represented validation from the academic community, but more importantly, it could provide scientific credibility that would open doors to larger contracts and more sophisticated customers. The university partnership was formalized within 3 weeks, bringing immediate benefits that exceeded their expectations. 2. Graduate students, Sarah Kim and Miguel Rodriguez, arrived to begin comprehensive data collection on everything from soil microbiology to bird behavior patterns. Their presence added an air of scientific rigor to the operation that impressed visitors and customers alike. But the real transformation came when Sarah discovered something remarkable in the soil samples she had been collecting from areas grazed by their mobile chicken coops. The carbon content was increasing at rates that defied conventional agricultural science, suggesting that their rotational grazing system was sequestering atmospheric carbon at unprecedented levels. "I've never seen anything like this," Sarah announced during one of their weekly progress meetings. "You're storing carbon in your soil at rates that are 3 times higher than documented benchmarks for managed grasslands." Miguel's research on biodiversity was equally surprising. The areas grazed by their chickens were supporting dramatically higher populations of beneficial insects, native plants, and soil organisms compared to conventionally managed farmland. Their operation wasn't just producing food, it was actively healing the landscape. The environmental data caught the attention of organizations that Marcus and Riley had never heard of. The Tennessee Environmental Council contacted them about featuring their farm in a statewide sustainability showcase. The USDS Natural Resources Conservation Service inquired about including their practices in official agricultural extension recommendations. Most significantly, they received a call from GreenCorp Industries, a company that purchased environmental credits from farmers and resold them to corporations seeking to offset their carbon emissions. "We'd like to offer you a 5-year contract for your carbon sequestration credits," explained Jennifer Walsh, GreenCorp's regional manager, during a phone conference that Riley had arranged. "Based on the university's preliminary data, we estimate your operation could generate approximately $40,000 annually in carbon credit sales." $40,000 represented pure profit, money earned not for producing anything, additional, but simply for farming in ways that benefited the environment. Combined with their egg sales and the anticipated expansion into vegetable production, it meant their operation would soon be generating multiple six-figure revenues. But success was bringing challenges that neither Marcus nor Riley had anticipated. Their reputation for innovation and quality was spreading faster than they could manage, resulting in opportunities that required difficult decisions about growth and direction. The most significant opportunity came from an unexpected source. Thomas Chun, Riley's uncle, who had been estranged from the family since Riley's mother's death. Thomas owned a successful food distribution company in California and had learned about Riley's success through mutual connections in the Asian American business community. "I want to help," Thomas said during a phone call that lasted nearly 2 hours. "Your mother would be proud of what you're building, and I regret that we lost touch after her funeral." Thomas's offer was substantial, a partnership that would provide access to West Coast markets, professional management expertise, and investment capital that could accelerate their expansion timeline by years rather than months. But it would also mean bringing family dynamics into their business relationship, with all the complications that could entail. Riley was conflicted about her uncle's proposal. The business benefits were undeniable, but she was wary of reopening family wounds that had taken months to heal. Her conversation with Marcus about the opportunity revealed depths of her personality that she had never shared before. "My mother and Thomas had a falling out over money when I was in high school," Riley explained as they sat in the kitchen, reviewing Thomas's detailed proposal. "She needed help with medical bills, and he said she should have planned better for emergencies." They never spoke again after that. Marcus understood the complexity of family business relationships from his own experience with his grandfather's farm. "Do you trust him now?" "I think so. He sounds genuinely sorry about what happened, and his business proposal is incredibly generous. But I'm afraid that working together could destroy whatever chance we have of rebuilding our relationship." The decision was complicated by another development that required immediate attention. Mountain Valley Distributors had contacted them again, this time with an offer that exceeded their previous discussions. They wanted to feature Thompson Farm as their flagship supplier of specialty eggs, with a contract that would guarantee purchase of their entire production for the next 3 years at premium prices. "We've been watching your operations development," David Brennan explained during his second visit to the farm. "Your consistency and quality exceed anything we've seen from farms 5 times your size. We'd like to make you an anchor supplier for our premium product line." The Mountain Valley contract would provide security and predictable revenue, but it would also lock them into a single customer relationship that could limit their flexibility to pursue other opportunities. Combined with Thomas's partnership offer, they faced decisions that would fundamentally shape the future direction of their enterprise. Riley spent sleepless nights analyzing spreadsheets and projections, trying to model different scenarios and their long-term implications. Her notebooks were filled with decision trees and risk assessments that reflected the sophisticated business analysis skills she had developed over the past year. "We need to think about what kind of business we want to become," Riley said during one of their evening planning sessions. "Are we farmers who happen to be good at business, or are we business people who happen to be in agriculture?" Marcus had been wrestling with the same question. The farm represented his family's legacy, but it was also becoming something entirely new under Riley's influence. The challenge was maintaining the values and practices that made their operation special while scaling up to meet the opportunities that their success had created. The answer came from an unexpected source: Jake Morrison, their young employee, who had been quietly observing their discussions about expansion and partnerships. Despite his youth, Jake possessed an intuitive understanding of rural community dynamics that proved valuable in their decision-making process. "You know what makes this place special?" Jake said during a lunch break, speaking with the confidence of someone who had grown up around successful farmers. It's not just that you produce good eggs. It's that you've figured out how to farm in a way that makes everything around you better. The soil, the environment, the community, even the people who work here. His observation crystallized something that Marcus and Riley had been struggling to articulate. Their operation success wasn't just about efficient production or innovative marketing. It was about demonstrating that agriculture could be a force for positive change in ways that went far beyond food production. That insight guided their response to both the Mountain Valley contract and Thomas's partnership proposal. They would accept the distribution contract, but with modifications that preserved their ability to maintain direct relationships with specialty customers. They would also explore the partnership with Thomas, but through a separate entity that could pursue new markets without compromising their core operation. The negotiations required legal expertise that exceeded anything Marcus or Riley had previously encountered. They retained Catherine Webb, an attorney who specialized in agricultural business law, to help structure agreements that protected their interests while maximizing growth opportunities. "You're creating something genuinely innovative," Catherine observed after reviewing their business model and growth projections. Most agricultural operations are either small family farms struggling to survive or large corporate enterprises focused solely on efficiency and scale. You've found a middle path that combines the best aspects of both approaches. By the end of March, the framework for their expansion was in place. The Mountain Valley contract was signed with terms that guaranteed substantial revenue while preserving their flexibility to pursue other opportunities. The partnership with Thomas was structured as a separate entity focused on product development and market expansion, allowing Riley to rebuild her family relationship while maintaining control over the core farm operation. But perhaps most importantly, they had established a clear vision for their enterprise that went beyond simple profit maximization. They were building a business that demonstrated how agriculture could be economically successful, environmentally sustainable, and socially beneficial simultaneously. As spring arrived in Cedar Valley, bringing the promise of new growth and expanded possibilities, Marcus and Riley stood in the farmyard that had become the center of their expanding empire. What had begun with a desperate girl stealing eggs to survive had evolved into an operation that was attracting attention from universities, corporations, and agricultural policy makers throughout the Southeast. The foundation they had laid over the past year was proving strong enough to support ambitions that neither of them had dared to imagine just months earlier. Spring brought an energy to Thompson Farm that Marcus had never experienced before. The property hummed with activity as construction crews worked on expanding their processing facilities, while university researchers continued documenting the environmental impact of their operations. Riley had hired 3 additional employees, transforming their small team into a coordinated workforce that could handle the dramatic increase in production volume their new contracts demanded. But the most significant change wasn't visible in the expanded coops or modern equipment. It was in Riley herself. The desperate teenager who had emerged from behind feed bags just 8 months earlier had evolved into a confident business executive who commanded respect from agricultural professionals twice her age. She wore her authority naturally, making decisions that affected thousands of dollars in revenue with the same calm precision she had once applied to counting stolen eggs. The transformation became particularly evident during a crisis that tested everything they had built together. In early April, a routine inspection by the Tennessee Department of Agriculture revealed irregularities in their record keeping that threatened their organic certification and, by extension, several of their most lucrative contracts. Inspector Janet Morris arrived on a Tuesday morning with the bureaucratic demeanor of someone who had seen every possible way that farmers could cut corners or violate regulations. Her clipboard held a checklist of compliance requirements that seemed designed to trap small operations in administrative complexities. Your feed source and documentation is incomplete, Morris announced after reviewing their files for nearly 3 hours. I'm seeing purchases from suppliers who aren't certified organic, but you're claiming organic status for eggs produced during those periods. Riley remained calm despite the inspector's accusatory tone, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders as she spread additional documents across the office desk they had recently installed in the renovated barn. Those purchases were for our conventional flocks, Riley explained patiently. We maintain completely separate operations for organic and conventional production, with different feed suppliers, different housing areas, and separate processing systems. Morris scrutinized the paperwork with obvious skepticism. Your batch tracking system doesn't clearly demonstrate separation. According to these records, organic and conventional eggs were processed on the same day using the same equipment. The accusation struck at the heart of their operations' credibility. Organic certification required absolute separation between organic and conventional products, and any contamination could result in loss of certification that would devastate their premium contracts. We process conventional eggs in the morning and organic eggs in the afternoon, Riley said, pulling out detailed cleaning logs and equipment sanitization records. There's a complete cleaning protocol between batches, documented and signed off by the responsible employee. Marcus watched the exchange with growing admiration for Riley's composure under pressure. She was methodically addressing each of Morris's concerns with documentation that demonstrated their commitment to compliance, but the inspector seemed determined to find violations regardless of the evidence presented. The inspection continued for 2 more hours, with Morris questioning every aspect of their operation from feed storage to employee training records. By the time she left, promising a written report within 10 business days, both Marcus and Riley were emotionally exhausted from defending practices they knew were exemplary. What happens if we lose our organic certification? Marcus asked as they sat in the kitchen that evening, too drained to cook dinner. Riley had already been analyzing the potential impact. We lose about 40% of our revenue immediately. The Nashville restaurants specifically require organic eggs, and Mountain Valley's premium pricing is tied to our certification status. The financial implications were staggering. Losing organic certification would force them to renegotiate contracts at conventional prices, eliminating the profit margins that funded their expansion and research partnerships. Worse, it could damage their reputation in ways that would be difficult to repair. But Riley's response to the crisis revealed the strategic thinking that had transformed their operation from a struggling farm into an agricultural showcase. Instead of waiting passively for the inspector's report, she immediately began implementing changes that would strengthen their compliance systems, regardless of the outcome. We're going to hire a compliance specialist, Riley announced the next morning. Someone with experience in organic certification who can review our entire operation and recommend improvements. The specialist she found was Dr. Elena Vasquez, a former USDA inspector who had transitioned into private consulting after 20 years in government service. Dr. Vasquez arrived within a week and conducted an audit that was even more thorough than the state inspection. Your actual practices exceed organic standards, Dr. Vasquez concluded after 3 days of investigation. The problem is documentation and presentation. You're doing everything right, but you're not communicating it effectively to inspectors who are trained to look for specific formats and procedures. Working with Dr. Vasquez, Riley implemented a compliance management system that would have impressed corporate agricultural operations. Digital record keeping replaced handwritten logs, barcode tracking ensured perfect batch separation, and employee training programs were formalized with certification requirements. The enhanced systems proved their value when Inspector Morris returned 2 weeks later with additional questions about their operation. This time, Riley was able to produce documentation that not only satisfied the inspector's requirements, but impressed her with their sophistication and attention to detail. "I have to admit," Morris said as she prepared to leave after her follow-up inspection, "this is the most thorough compliance system I've seen on a farm this size. You folks are setting a new standard for organic operations." The organic certification crisis had an unexpected benefit. It forced them to develop operational systems that could support much larger scale production. The compliance framework they had created could easily handle 10 times their current volume, positioning them for growth opportunities that they hadn't previously considered feasible. Those opportunities materialized sooner than expected when Thomas Chun arrived for his first visit to the farm in late April. Riley's uncle was a compact man in his early 50s with the focused energy of someone who had built a successful business through careful attention to detail and strategic thinking. His presence created complicated emotions for Riley, but their professional interactions were immediately productive. "This is impressive," Thomas said as Riley walked him through their operation. "I've seen commercial facilities with less sophisticated systems than what you've built here." Thomas's distribution company specialized in premium Asian food products for restaurants and specialty markets throughout California. His proposal involved creating a West Coast supply chain for Thompson Farm products, but with additional offerings that would leverage their proven expertise in sustainable agriculture. "Quail eggs," Thomas explained as they stood near the Heritage chicken coops. "There's a huge market for them in California, particularly in high-end restaurants and Asian grocery stores. The demand far exceeds domestic supply, so most retailers import from overseas." Riley was intrigued by the diversification opportunity. Quail production would require different housing and management techniques, but the birds were smaller and more efficient than chickens, potentially offering higher profit margins despite lower individual egg prices. "What kind of volume would justify the investment?" Riley asked. "Start with 500 laying quail, scale up to 2,000 over the first year. At current California wholesale prices, you're looking at additional revenue of about $15,000 monthly once production stabilizes." The numbers were compelling, but Riley had learned to analyze opportunities beyond simple profit projections. Quail production would require specialized knowledge, different market relationships, and operational complexity that could distract from their core chicken operations. Marcus had remained quiet during most of Thomas's visit, observing the family dynamics while evaluating the business proposals. As Riley's partner, he had developed protective instincts about opportunities that seemed too good to be true. But Thomas's suggestions were supported by detailed market analysis and financial projections. What would be the partnership structure? Marcus asked. Thomas had clearly anticipated the question. "Thompson Farm retains complete operational control. My company handles West Coast distribution, marketing, and customer relationships. We split profits 50-50 after production costs, with guaranteed minimum purchases regardless of market fluctuations." The risk-sharing arrangement addressed Marcus's main concerns about expanding into unfamiliar markets. If demand for quail eggs didn't materialize as projected, Thomas's company would absorb the loss rather than Thompson Farm. Riley requested 2 weeks to evaluate the proposal, using the time to research quail production techniques and market conditions independently. Her analysis confirmed Thomas's projections while identifying additional opportunities for value-added products like pickled quail eggs and specialty gift packages. But the decision to partner with Thomas involved more than business calculations. It represented Riley's choice about family relationships and her willingness to trust someone who had failed her mother during the critical time. The resolution came during a private conversation between Riley and Thomas on his final evening at the farm. They sat on the front porch of the farmhouse, watching the sunset paint the Tennessee hills in shades of gold and purple. "I should have helped your mother," Thomas said quietly. "I was angry about my own business problems, and I convinced myself that she was being irresponsible with money. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Riley had been carrying anger about her uncle's abandonment for over a year, but his straightforward apology and obvious remorse made forgiveness easier than she had expected. "She would want us to work together," Riley said finally. She always believed that family was more important than pride or past mistakes. The partnership agreement was signed in May, launching Thompson Farms' expansion into specialty poultry products. The first shipment of quail breeding stock arrived from a facility in Georgia, requiring rapid construction of specialized housing that could accommodate the birds' unique behavioral needs. Riley's learning curve with quail proved remarkably steep. Within 6 weeks, she had mastered the intricacies of quail nutrition, breeding, and health management with the same systematic approach she had applied to chicken production. The birds responded well to her care, achieving reproduction rates that exceeded the supplier's projections. But perhaps the most significant development was the arrival of their first intern from the University of Tennessee's agricultural program. Jessica Park was a senior, studying sustainable agriculture, who had specifically requested placement at Thompson Farm after hearing Dr. Valdez's presentations about their innovative practices. Jessica brought fresh perspectives and academic knowledge that complemented Riley's practical experience. Her senior thesis project involved analyzing the economic and environmental benefits of integrating multiple poultry species in rotational grazing systems, using Thompson Farm as a case study. "You're creating a model that other farms could replicate," Jessica observed during one of their weekly planning meetings. "The key is demonstrating that sustainable practices can be more profitable than conventional methods, not just more environmentally responsible." The documentation of their success was attracting attention from agricultural policymakers who were looking for examples of innovative farming that could influence future regulations and support programs. Riley received invitations to speak at conferences, participate in government advisory committees, and contribute to research publications that would establish her as an expert in sustainable agriculture. The recognition was gratifying, but it also created time pressures that threatened to pull Riley away from the hands-on management that made their operations successful. She began delegating more responsibilities to their growing staff while maintaining oversight of critical decisions and strategic planning. By summer's end, Thompson Farm employed 12 people across multiple production areas. The original chicken operation had expanded to include 7 heritage breeds, producing eggs for restaurant and retail customers throughout the Southeast. The quail operation was approaching full production capacity, with orders from California customers exceeding their ability to supply. The university research partnership had generated publications that established their farm as a model for regenerative agriculture practices. Most remarkably, the financial transformation was complete. The farm that had been bleeding money just 18 months earlier was now generating annual revenues approaching $700,000, with profit margins that would have impressed Fortune 500 agricultural corporations. But for Marcus and Riley, the numbers represented something more significant than financial success. They had proven that small-scale agriculture could compete with corporate operations by emphasizing quality, innovation, and environmental stewardship rather than simple cost reduction and volume production. As they stood in the farmyard on a warm August evening, watching their employees complete the daily routines that had once been overwhelming for just 2 people, both of them understood that they had crossed another threshold. They were no longer building a farm. They were creating an enterprise that could serve as a foundation for further expansion into markets and opportunities they were only beginning to imagine. The phone call that would catapult Thompson Farm into national prominence came on a crisp September morning while Riley was reviewing production schedules in the newly constructed administrative building. The caller identified himself as Robert Steinberg, senior producer for American Agriculture Today, a documentary series that aired on major networks and streaming platforms across the country. "We've been following your operation through academic Channels, Steinberg explained, his voice carrying the practiced enthusiasm of someone accustomed to selling ambitious projects. Your farm represents exactly the kind of innovative agriculture our viewers want to understand. We'd like to feature Thompson Farm in our upcoming season. Riley had learned to be cautious about media opportunities, understanding that television coverage could bring benefits and complications in equal measure. What kind of feature are you considering? A full episode, Steinberg replied. 60 minutes focused entirely on your operation, covering everything from your sustainable practices to your business model, to the personal story behind your success. We're particularly interested in the partnership between you and Marcus, and how you've managed to achieve commercial success while maintaining environmental responsibility. The opportunity was significant beyond simple publicity. American Agriculture Today reached millions of viewers, including agricultural professionals, policymakers, and consumers who influenced market trends and regulatory decisions. A positive feature could open doors to opportunities they hadn't yet imagined, but Riley's experience with Inspector Morris had taught her to evaluate potential partnerships carefully. What would be required from our end? Full access for a production team over approximately 3 weeks. We'd film daily operations, conduct detailed interviews, and document your processes from egg collection through customer delivery. The goal is to show viewers how modern agriculture can be both profitable and sustainable. Riley requested time to discuss the opportunity with Marcus and their advisory team, which now included Dr. Valdez from the university and Catherine Webb, their attorney. The consensus was overwhelmingly positive. The exposure could establish Thompson Farm as a national model for innovative agriculture. The documentary crew arrived in early October, bringing equipment that transformed their farmyard into a professional production site. Director Sarah Mitchell was a veteran agricultural journalist who understood the complexity of modern farming and asked questions that revealed deep knowledge of sustainable agriculture practices. What I find remarkable, Mitchell said during Riley's on-camera interview, is how you've managed to scale up without compromising the values that made your operation successful initially. Most farms face a choice between growth and sustainability, but you found ways to achieve both. Riley's response reflected the analytical thinking that had guided their expansion strategy. We realized early on that sustainability isn't just about environmental practices. It's about creating systems that can maintain quality and profitability over the long term. Short-term thinking leads to short-term results. The filming process revealed aspects of their operation that even Riley hadn't fully appreciated. When the cameras followed their eggs from collection through packaging to delivery, the complexity and sophistication of their systems became apparent. Every step involved quality controls, environmental considerations, and efficiency improvements that had evolved through months of careful refinement. Marcus's interview provided historical context that helped viewers understand the transformation Thompson Farm had undergone. 18 months ago, I was ready to give up, he admitted, standing in the farmyard that now bustled with activity. The farm was failing, I was drowning in debt, and I couldn't see any way forward. Finding Riley changed everything, not just because she brought new ideas, but because she helped me remember why farming matters. The documentary's most powerful segment focused on the environmental impact of their practices. Dr. Valdez appeared on camera to explain the carbon sequestration data, while aerial footage showed the dramatic difference between their pastures and neighboring conventional farmland. The visual contrast was striking. Thompson Farm's fields were green and vibrant, teeming with diverse plant and animal life, while conventional operations appeared sterile and depleted. But perhaps the most compelling footage captured the human dimension of their success. Jake Morrison, now promoted to operations supervisor, spoke eloquently about how working at Thompson Farm had influenced his own career plans. Jessica Park discussed her research findings and their implications for Agricultural policy. Even Thomas Chun appeared via video conference to explain how their partnership was influencing distribution practices throughout the West Coast. The documentary aired on a Sunday evening in late November, reaching an estimated audience of 12 million viewers. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Their phone rang constantly with inquiries from potential customers, aspiring farmers seeking advice, and business partners proposing collaboration opportunities. More significantly, the documentary caught the attention of Elizabeth Harrison, CEO of Sustainable Foods International, a company that specialized in connecting environmentally responsible producers with premium markets worldwide. Harrison called personally the day after the broadcast, proposing a meeting that could transform Thompson Farm from a regional success story into a global enterprise. "I've been in this business for 20 years, Harrison said during their video conference, and I've never seen an operation that combines your level of innovation with proven scalability. We'd like to discuss representing Thompson Farm in international markets." The prospect of international expansion had never seriously occurred to Marcus or Riley, but Harrison's company had relationships with high-end restaurants, luxury hotels, and specialty retailers in Europe and Asia who paid premium prices for exceptional agricultural products. What kind of volume would international customers require? Riley asked, already mentally calculating their production capacity and expansion possibilities. Initially, perhaps 2,000 dozen eggs monthly for our European clients, with potential for significant growth based on market response. But we're also interested in your quail products, your carbon credit program, and potentially licensing your production methods to international partners. The licensing concept was particularly intriguing. Rather than simply exporting products, they could share their knowledge and systems with farmers in other countries, generating revenue from intellectual property while expanding the global impact of their sustainable practices. The conversation with Harrison coincided with another significant development, an offer from the Tennessee Department of Agriculture to designate Thompson Farm as an official demonstration site for sustainable agriculture. The designation would bring government support for research and education programs while establishing them as a resource for farmers throughout the Southeast. The demonstration site program provides grants for infrastructure improvements, funding for educational workshops, and technical assistance for farmers wanting to adopt similar practices, explained Commissioner Julie Martinez during her visit to announce the designation. Thompson Farm would serve as a living laboratory where we can document best practices and share them with the agricultural community. The government partnership represented validation from the highest levels of agricultural leadership, but it also came with responsibilities that would require careful integration with their commercial operations. Hosting educational programs and research activities could conflict with production schedules and customer commitments. Riley approached the challenge with characteristic systematic analysis, developing plans that would accommodate demonstration activities while maintaining operational efficiency. The solution involved designating specific areas of the farm for educational purposes, creating scheduled tour programs that minimize disruption to daily operations, and establishing partnerships with agricultural extension services that could provide educational expertise. The demonstration site designation was announced at a ceremony attended by state officials, university researchers, and agricultural industry leaders. Riley's speech at the event reflected her evolution from desperate teenager to agricultural innovator, but more importantly, it articulated a vision for the future of American farming. Sustainable agriculture isn't just about environmental responsibility, Riley told the assembled audience. It's about creating food systems that can support growing populations, while preserving the natural resources that make agriculture possible. What we've learned at Thompson Farm is that these goals aren't contradictory, they're complementary. The ceremony attracted additional media coverage, including articles in agricultural trade publications and interviews with national farming organizations. Riley found herself increasingly recognized as a spokesperson for innovative agriculture, receiving invitations to speak at conferences and serve on industry committees. But the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source: Sarah Thompson, Marcus's ex-wife, who reached out after seeing the documentary. Their conversation was awkward initially, colored by the painful history of their divorce and the custody arrangements that had separated Marcus from his daughter Emma. "I owe you an apology," Sarah said during their phone conversation. "I never understood what the farm meant to you, and I definitely never imagined it could become what I saw on television. Emma has been asking about visiting, if that would be okay." The prospect of reconnecting with his daughter brought emotions that Marcus had kept carefully suppressed for months. Emma was now 9 years old, at an age where she could appreciate the farm and perhaps understand the passion that had driven her father's commitment to agriculture. Emma's first visit since the divorce occurred on a December weekend when the farm was blanketed in fresh snow. Riley watched Marcus show his daughter on the operation, explaining the different breeds of chickens and quail, demonstrating the mobile co-op systems, and introducing her to the employees who had become like family. "Daddy, you're famous," Emma exclaimed after watching clips from the documentary on Riley's laptop. "My teacher said your farm is helping save the environment." The visit was emotionally charged for Marcus, but it also represented a form of completion. The success he and Riley had built together was meaningful not just in business terms, but in personal terms that restored relationships and created hope for the future. As winter approached, Thompson Farm was operating at levels that exceeded their most optimistic projections from just 2 years earlier. They were producing over 4,000 dozen eggs monthly across multiple heritage breeds, had established international distribution partnerships, were generating significant revenue from carbon credits, and had become a nationally recognized model for sustainable agriculture. The numbers were impressive, but the real achievement was more fundamental. They had proven that agriculture could be simultaneously profitable, environmentally beneficial, and socially responsible. Their success was attracting imitators throughout the region, creating a movement toward sustainable farming practices that extended far beyond their original operation. Riley, now 21, had evolved from a homeless teenager stealing eggs to survive into one of the most influential young voices in American agriculture. Her story was being studied in business schools as an example of innovative entrepreneurship, while agricultural colleges used Thompson Farm as a case study in sustainable production methods. But perhaps most remarkably, the partnership between Riley and Marcus had matured into something that transcended their original employer-employer relationship. They had become true collaborators, each contributing unique strengths to an enterprise that neither could have created alone. As they stood in the farmyard on New Year's Eve, watching fireworks light up the Tennessee sky while their employees celebrated another year of unprecedented success, both of them understood that they had achieved something extraordinary. What had begun with 18 stolen eggs had become a multi-million-dollar enterprise that was influencing agricultural practices around the world. The foundation of their empire was no longer just a metaphor. It was a reality that would continue, growing for years to come. 2 years after the documentary aired, Thompson Farm had become something that neither Marcus nor Riley could have imagined during those early days when survival was their primary concern. The operation now spanned 3 states, employed over 60 people, and generated annual revenues exceeding $8 million. But the most significant transformation wasn't measured in financial terms. It was the creation of an agricultural movement that was reshaping how America thought about food production. Riley stood before the Senate Agriculture Committee in Washington, D.C., wearing a Navy business suit that reflected her evolution from farm worker to industry leader. At 23, she had become one of the youngest people ever invited to testify before Congress about agricultural policy, representing not just Thompson Farm, but the broader movement toward regenerative agriculture that their success had helped inspire. Senators, the question isn't whether sustainable agriculture can compete with conventional methods, Riley said, addressing the panel of lawmakers who would influence billions of dollars in farm subsidies and regulations. The question is whether we can afford not to transition to practices that rebuild our soil, sequester carbon, and create resilient food systems. Her testimony was supported by data from dozens of farms that had adopted Thompson Farms methods through their consulting and licensing programs. The results were consistent across different regions and climates. Farmers who implemented regenerative practices were achieving higher profitability while improving environmental outcomes. Senator Patricia Williams from Iowa, a state dominated by conventional corn and soybean production, posed the critical question that agricultural interests had been asking since Thompson Farm gained national attention. Ms. Chun, your operation is impressive, but can these methods scale to feed a global population of 8 billion people? Riley had anticipated this challenge and responded with the confidence of someone who had spent years analyzing agricultural systems worldwide. Senator, our research partnerships with universities in 12 countries have demonstrated that regenerative practices actually increase yield potential over time while reducing input costs. The limiting factor isn't technical, it's the transition period required to rebuild soil health and establish new supply chains. The hearing was broadcast live on agricultural networks, reaching farmers, policymakers, and industry leaders throughout the country. Riley's appearance represented a generational shift in agricultural leadership, as younger voices began challenging assumptions that had guided American farming for decades. Back in Tennessee, Marcus watched the hearing from the executive offices they had built adjacent to the original farmhouse. The irony wasn't lost on him. The woman testifying before the most powerful agricultural committee in the world was the same person he had found stealing eggs from his chicken coop 3 years earlier. Thompson Farms International, as their expanded enterprise was now known, operated facilities in Tennessee, Kentucky, and North Carolina, with licensing agreements extending their methods to operations in 15 countries. Their flagship facility in Cedar Valley had become a pilgrimage site for agricultural professionals, hosting over 5,000 visitors annually through their educational programs. But the expansion had brought challenges that tested both Marcus and Riley's leadership abilities. Managing a multinational enterprise required skills that neither of them had possessed as farmers, necessitating the recruitment of professional managers and the development of corporate systems that could maintain quality while supporting rapid growth. The solution had been to structure Thompson Farms International as a holding company with semi-autonomous regional operations, each managed by teams that combined agricultural expertise with business acumen. Riley served as CEO, focusing on strategic development and external relationships, while Marcus retained operational oversight as president, ensuring that their core values weren't compromised by commercial pressures. Their most ambitious project was the Thompson Institute for Regenerative Agriculture, a research and education facility that occupied a 100-acre campus adjacent to their original farm. The institute attracted scientists, farmers, and policymakers from around the world, serving as a neutral ground where different approaches to sustainable agriculture could be tested and refined. Dr. Patricia Valdez had left the University of Tennessee to become the institute's director of research, leading studies that were establishing scientific foundations for regenerative practices. Her work was generating publications in peer-reviewed journals while providing practical guidance for farmers transitioning to sustainable methods. What we've learned through the Thompson Institute is that regenerative agriculture isn't just one set of practices, Dr. Valdez explained during a conference attended by agricultural scientists from 30 countries. It's a systems approach that must be adapted to local conditions, climate patterns, and market requirements. The principles are universal, but the implementation is highly specific. The Institute's research was influencing agricultural policy worldwide, with governments in Europe, Australia, and parts of Asia incorporating regenerative practices into their farm subsidy programs. The European Union had specifically cited Thompson Farms' carbon sequestration data when establishing new environmental requirements for agricultural support payments. Riley's influence extended beyond agriculture into broader discussions about climate change and environmental policy. She served on corporate boards, advised government agencies, and spoke at international conferences where agriculture intersected with energy, transportation, and urban planning. But perhaps her most meaningful work was mentoring young farmers who were trying to establish sustainable operations. The Thompson Foundation, a nonprofit organization funded by their business success, provided grants, technical assistance, and market connections for beginning farmers who committed to regenerative practices. Every week, I meet with farmers who remind me of myself 3 years ago, Riley said during an interview with Agricultural Business magazine. They're passionate about doing things differently, but they need support to navigate the transition period when you're rebuilding soil health while maintaining cash flow. The foundation had supported over 200 farming operations across the United States, creating a network of producers who shared knowledge and collaborated on marketing initiatives. Many of these operations had become suppliers for Thompson Farms International's distribution network, creating vertical integration that benefited both the company and independent farmers. Marcus found his greatest satisfaction in the mentorship relationships he had developed with younger farmers. His office hosted a constant stream of visitors seeking advice about everything from chicken breeds to business planning, and he had become known for his practical wisdom and willingness to share hard-earned knowledge. One particularly memorable conversation involved James Patterson, a young veteran who was using disability benefits to start a small poultry operation in rural Alabama. Patterson had visited Thompson Farm after losing his leg in Afghanistan, seeking purpose and meaning in civilian life. "I spent 2 tours fighting overseas," Patterson told Marcus during their meeting, "but I think I can do more good growing food than I ever did carrying a rifle. The question is whether I can make it work financially." Marcus saw himself in Patterson's determination and uncertainty, remembering his own desperate situation just a few years earlier. The conversation led to a consulting arrangement that helped Patterson establish an operation modeled on Thompson Farms methods, adapted for Alabama's climate and market conditions. Patterson's farm became one of the foundation's flagship success stories, achieving profitability within 18 months while demonstrating that regenerative practices could work in the Deep South. His success attracted other veterans to agriculture, creating a movement that addressed both rural economic development and veteran employment challenges. The Veteran Farmer Initiative became a national model, earning recognition from the Department of Veterans Affairs and agricultural organizations throughout the country. Riley testified before Congress about the program's potential to address veteran unemployment while revitalizing rural communities, but the achievement that brought Marcus the most personal satisfaction was the restoration of his relationship with Emma, who now spent every weekend at the farm and had declared her intention to study agriculture in college. At 11, she displayed natural instincts with animals and an analytical mind that reminded Marcus of Riley at that age. "Dad, when I take over the farm, I want to add horses," Emma announced during one of their weekend planning sessions, displaying the confidence of someone who had never doubted that the farm would be part of her future. Marcus exchanged glances with Riley, both of them recognizing the assumption underlying Emma's statement that Thompson Farm would continue as a family operation despite its corporate transformation. The idea of Emma eventually joining the business added another dimension to their long-term planning. Sarah Thompson had also become an unexpected supporter of Marcus's work, using her position as a school administrator to develop agricultural education programs that connected urban students with working farms. Her curriculum incorporated Thompson Farms methods, while teaching children about food systems and environmental science. The family reconciliation had created stability in Marcus's personal life that enhanced his effectiveness as a business leader. He was no longer driven by desperation and debt, but by the satisfaction of building something meaningful that could benefit future generations. As Thompson Farms International approached its 5th anniversary, Riley and Marcus reflected on the Farms International approached its 5th anniversary. Riley and Marcus reflected on the versary. Riley and Marcus reflected on the Fiona journey that had transformed their lives and influenced agricultural practices worldwide. They stood in the original chicken coop where Riley had first emerged from behind the feed bags, now preserved as a symbolic reminder of their humble beginnings. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been stealing your eggs that morning? Riley asked, running her hand along the same wooden beam where she had hidden during those desperate days. Marcus considered the question seriously. I think we would have found each other eventually. You were too smart and too determined to stay hidden forever, and I was too stubborn to give up on this place. Their partnership had evolved into something that transcended business relationships, or even friendship. They had become collaborators in the truest sense, each contributing unique strengths to an enterprise that neither could have created alone. The numbers told part of their story: $8 million in annual revenue, 60 employees, operations across 3 states, and influence in 15 countries. But the real achievement was more fundamental. They had proven that agriculture could be a force for positive change in ways that extended far beyond food production. Thompson Farms International was sequestering thousands of tons of carbon annually, providing livelihoods for hundreds of families, supplying premium food to thousands of customers, and serving as a model for sustainable practices that were being adopted worldwide. Riley had been featured on magazine covers, invited to speak at international conferences, and recognized as one of the most influential young leaders in American business. But she remained grounded by the daily rhythms of farm life and the knowledge that their success was built on the fundamental relationship between humans, animals, and the land. Marcus had achieved financial security that exceeded anything he had imagined possible, but more importantly, he had discovered a purpose that went beyond personal survival. His grandfather's farm had not only been saved, it had become the foundation for an enterprise that was influencing agricultural practices around the world. As the sun set over Cedar Valley on a warm spring evening, painting the Tennessee hills in shades of gold and purple, Marcus and Riley walked through the farmyard that had become the center of their expanding empire. Chickens pecked contentedly in the pastures, quail called from their specialized enclosures, and the sounds of a working farm provided the soundtrack for their evening conversation. 3 years earlier, Riley Chun had been a homeless teenager, desperate enough to steal eggs for survival. Marcus Thompson had been a failing farmer on the verge of losing everything his family had built over 3 generations. Their chance encounter in a chicken coop had created something neither of them could have imagined: an agricultural empire built on the foundation of 18 stolen eggs, sustained by innovation and hard work, and dedicated to proving that farming could be profitable, sustainable, and socially beneficial simultaneously. The empire they had built would continue growing, but its foundation would always be remembered as the moment when a struggling farmer found a desperate girl stealing eggs and decided to offer her a chance instead of punishment. That decision had changed not just their lives, but the future of American agriculture itself. 5 years after Riley Chun first emerged from behind those feed bags, Thompson Farms International faced its greatest challenge yet, not from competitors or market forces, but from their own unprecedented success. The company had grown beyond agriculture into a diversified empire that included food processing, renewable energy, agricultural technology, and even pharmaceutical research based on compounds found in their heritage breed eggs. Riley stood in the boardroom of their new corporate headquarters in Nashville, a gleaming building that housed over 200 employees working on projects that spanned multiple industries. The transformation from desperate teenager to Fortune 500 CEO seemed surreal even to her. But the weight of responsibility was very real as she addressed the board of directors about their most ambitious expansion yet: the acquisition of Biotech Solutions represents our entry into the pharmaceutical sector, Riley explained, gesturing toward financial projections displayed on the conference room's smart screens. Their research has identified unique protein compounds in our silky chicken eggs that show promise for treating autoimmune disorders. Board member Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, a former pharmaceutical executive, raised the question that everyone was thinking. Riley, you've built an extraordinary agricultural enterprise, but pharmaceutical development is a completely different business with regulatory complexities that could consume resources for years without guaranteed returns. Concern was valid. Biotech Solutions was seeking $40 million for equipment and research facilities that would allow them to extract and purify compounds from Thompson Farms eggs for clinical trials. The investment would be their largest to date, requiring them to leverage assets across their entire operation. But Riley had learned to think beyond traditional business boundaries, seeing connections that others missed. The pharmaceutical potential doesn't replace our agricultural operations, it enhances them. Premium pricing for medicinal eggs could generate revenues that are 10 times higher than food markets, while creating intellectual property that protects our competitive advantages. Marcus, now serving as chairman of the board while maintaining operational oversight of their farming operations, supported Riley's vision despite his own reservations about moving so far from their agricultural roots. The question isn't whether we should diversify, he said, addressing the other board members. The question is whether we can maintain our values and quality standards while operating at this scale. The discussion was interrupted by an urgent call from their Tennessee facility. Jake Morrison, now Regional Operations Director, was reporting a crisis that threatened to undermine everything they had built. A contamination issue in one of their processing facilities had triggered a voluntary recall of premium eggs distributed to restaurants throughout the Southeast. We've got potential salmonella contamination in batch TF2024-847, Jake explained during the emergency video conference. No confirmed illnesses yet, but health department protocols require us to recall approximately 50,000 dozen eggs from our restaurant customers. The financial impact would be significant, perhaps $2 million in direct costs, plus immeasurable damage to their reputation for quality and safety. But Riley's response demonstrated the crisis management skills she had developed through years of navigating challenges that would have destroyed less resilient operations. Initiate the recall immediately, Riley directed, her voice calm despite the magnitude of the situation. Contact every affected customer personally, not just through official channels. I want our quality control team to trace the contamination. Source within 24 hours, and I want a complete review of our processing protocols within a week. The contamination was eventually traced to a single piece of equipment that had malfunctioned during cleaning, allowing bacteria to survive. The sanitization process. The response Riley orchestrated: immediate transparency, generous compensation for affected customers, and implementation of enhanced safety measures, actually strengthened their relationships with restaurant partners who were impressed by their accountability and professionalism. But the crisis had revealed vulnerabilities in their operation that could become more serious as they expanded into pharmaceutical markets where contamination could have life-threatening consequences. The incident prompted a comprehensive review of their quality systems and led to investments in automated monitoring technology that would prevent similar problems in the future. The pharmaceutical venture moved forward despite the setback, with Biotech Solutions establishing laboratories at the Thompson Institute for Regenerative Agriculture, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the lead researcher, was making discoveries that excited the medical community while opening new revenue streams for Thompson Farms International. The protein compounds in silky eggs appear to modulate immune system responses in ways that could treat conditions ranging from rheumatoid arthritis to multiple sclerosis. Dr. Walsh explained during a presentation to potential pharmaceutical partners. The challenge is developing extraction and purification methods that maintain biological activity while meeting FDA standards for drug development. The pharmaceutical research was attracting attention from major drug companies who were interested in licensing Thompson Farms compounds for commercial development. The negotiations involved intellectual property valuations that could potentially generate hundreds of millions of dollars in licensing revenue over the next decade. But Riley's most significant achievement during this period wasn't measured in financial terms. It was the creation of the Global Regenerative Agriculture Alliance, an international organization dedicated to promoting sustainable farming practices worldwide. The alliance brought together farmers, researchers, policymakers, and business leaders from 43 countries to share knowledge and coordinate efforts to address climate change through agriculture. Agriculture is responsible for approximately 24% of global greenhouse gas emissions, Riley told the Alliance's founding conference, held at the United Nations headquarters in New York. But regenerative practices can reverse that equation, making agriculture a net carbon sink while increasing food security and farmer profitability. The Alliance was establishing demonstration farms on every continent, training programs for agricultural extension agents, and policy recommendations for governments seeking to incentivize sustainable practices. Riley's leadership of this international effort had earned her recognition as one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people, and invitations to speak at climate summits alongside world leaders. Marcus found his role evolving as well, transitioning from hands-on farming to strategic oversight of their global operations. His office wall displayed maps showing Thompson Farms International facilities across 5 continents, each dot representing jobs, environmental improvements, and food security for local communities. The international expansion had brought cultural challenges that required sensitivity and adaptation. Their facility in Kenya, established through a partnership with local farmers, had taken 3 years to achieve profitability as they learned to work within different regulatory systems and cultural practices. The key insight, Marcus explained, to visiting agricultural attaches from various embassies is that sustainable agriculture looks different in every region, but the underlying principles are universal. We provide technical expertise and market connections, but local farmers provide knowledge about their specific conditions and community needs. Their Kenyan operation had become a model for agricultural development that created economic opportunities while preserving traditional farming knowledge. The facility employed over 300 people and supplied premium eggs to luxury hotels and restaurants throughout East Africa. Similar operations in Brazil, India, and Australia were demonstrating that regenerative practices could work across different climates and economic systems. Each facility was adapted to local conditions while maintaining the quality standards and environmental benefits that define the Thompson Farms brand. Thompson, now 14 and spending entire summers working at the farm, was developing into a formidable young leader who combined her father's practical wisdom with Riley's analytical thinking. Her science fair projects focused on agricultural innovations, and she had already published papers in youth agricultural journals about heritage, breed genetics, and sustainable feeding practices. I want to study agricultural engineering and biotechnology. In college, Emma announced during one of their family planning sessions. But I also want to spend a year working at our international facilities before I take on any management responsibilities. The conversation reflected the multi-generational thinking that was becoming characteristic of Thompson Farms International. They were building not just for current success, but for continuity across decades and potentially centuries. Riley's personal life had evolved as well. Her relationship with Dr. Michael Chun, a veterinary researcher at the Thompson Institute, had developed into an engagement that would unite two brilliant minds dedicated to advancing agricultural science. Michael's expertise in animal genetics was contributing to breeding programs that enhanced both productivity and disease resistance in their heritage poultry flocks. The wedding, planned for the following spring, would be held at the original farm where Riley and Marcus had first met. The symbolic significance wasn't lost on anyone. The ceremony would take place in the same farmyard where a desperate teenager had once hidden behind feed bags, now transformed into the headquarters of a global agricultural empire. But perhaps the most meaningful development was the establishment of the Chun-Thompson Scholarship Program, funded by Riley's personal fortune and designed to support young people from disadvantaged backgrounds who wanted to pursue careers in sustainable agriculture. The program provided full college scholarships, internship opportunities, and mentorship relationships that could transform lives in the same way that Marcus's decision to help Riley had changed their destinies. Every year, I meet scholarship recipients who remind me of myself at 17, Riley said during the program's inaugural dinner. They're brilliant, determined, and facing obstacles that seem insurmountable. What they need is someone who believes in their potential and provides opportunities to develop their talents. The first class of scholarship recipients included 25 students from 12 countries, each committed to returning to their communities to implement regenerative agriculture practices. The program was creating a network of young leaders who would carry forward the values and innovations that Thompson Farms International represented. As Thompson Farms International approached its 6th anniversary, the company was generating annual revenues exceeding $50 million across multiple business lines. Their agricultural operations produced over 1 million dozen eggs annually. Their pharmaceutical research was progressing toward clinical trials. Their consulting division was working with governments and corporations worldwide, and their renewable energy projects were generating clean electricity for rural communities. The numbers were impressive, but the real achievement was the demonstration that business success and social responsibility weren't contradictory goals. Thompson Farms International had created thousands of jobs, sequestered millions of tons of carbon, improved soil health across hundreds of thousands of acres, and provided food security for communities around the world. Riley and Marcus often reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point, marveling at the series of decisions and circumstances that had transformed a moment of desperation into a global enterprise. The story was being studied in business schools as an example of innovative entrepreneurship, but for them, it remained fundamentally about the power of human relationships and the willingness to take risks for the sake of others. Standing in the original chicken coop that had been preserved as a museum exhibit, surrounded by photographs and artifacts that documented their incredible journey, both of them understood that their greatest achievement wasn't the empire they had built, but the lives they had touched and the positive changes they had inspired. Throughout the world, the foundation laid by 18 stolen eggs had become something far beyond what either of them had ever imagined possible. 10 years after that fateful October morning when desperation drove a homeless teenager to steal 18 eggs from a struggling farmer's chicken coop, Riley Chun Thompson stood before the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, delivering the keynote address on agriculture as climate solution. At 29, she was the youngest CEO ever to address the prestigious gathering of global leaders, representing not just Thompson Farms International, but a fundamental shift in how the world understood the relationship between food production and environmental sustainability. A decade ago, agriculture was seen as part of the climate problem, Riley told the assembled heads of state, corporate executives, and Nobel laureates. Today, regenerative agriculture represents one of our most powerful tools for reversing climate change while feeding a growing global population. The transformation isn't just possible, it's profitable. Behind her words lay the extraordinary journey that had taken Thompson Farms International from a desperate partnership between two struggling individuals to a multinational corporation valued at over $2 billion. Their agricultural operations now span 6 continents. Their pharmaceutical division was conducting Phase 3 clinical trials for 3 breakthrough medications, and their carbon sequestration projects were removing millions of tons of greenhouse gases from the atmosphere annually. Marcus Thompson, now 52 and serving as executive chairman, watched the speech from the audience with a mixture of pride and amazement. The young woman commanding the attention of world leaders was the same person he had found hiding behind feed bags, clutching stolen eggs with a mixture of defiance and desperation that had somehow convinced him to offer help instead of punishment. Decision to help Riley had transformed both their lives in ways that continued to unfold with each passing year. Marcus had remarried to Dr. Sarah Kim, the former graduate student who had discovered their revolutionary carbon sequestration techniques. Emma, now 19 and studying agricultural biotechnology at Stanford University, was preparing to join the company as an intern in their renewable energy division. But the personal transformations were overshadowed by the global impact of their work. The techniques pioneered at Thompson Farm were now being implemented by over 10,000 agricultural operations worldwide, collectively sequestering carbon equivalent to removing 5 million cars from the road each year. The regenerative agriculture movement they had helped launch was influencing policy decisions in dozens of countries and changing how consumers thought about food production. Riley's speech in Davos was interrupted by unexpected applause when she revealed Thompson Farms International's latest initiative, a commitment to make their regenerative agriculture techniques freely available to any farmer worldwide, regardless of their ability to pay licensing fees. "We're open sourcing our intellectual property," Riley announced, "because the climate crisis is too urgent to let patent protection slow the adoption of solutions that work. Our profits come from implementation and support services, not from hoarding knowledge that could help heal our planet." The announcement represented a fundamental philosophical shift for a company that had built significant value through proprietary methods and exclusive partnerships. But Riley and Marcus had concluded that their long-term success depended on creating a world where sustainable agriculture was the norm rather than the exception. The open source initiative was already showing results. Within 6 months of the announcement, agricultural extension services in 47 countries had begun training programs based on Thompson Farm methods. Universities were incorporating their techniques into curriculum, and government agencies were updating subsidy programs to incentivize regenerative practices. Perhaps most significantly, the first Thompson Farm medication, a treatment for rheumatoid arthritis derived from heritage chicken egg proteins, had received FDA approval and was generating hundreds of millions in revenue while providing relief for patients who had exhausted conventional treatment options. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, now Chief Scientific Officer for their pharmaceutical division, had led the research that identified the unique protein compounds found in eggs from chickens raised using their regenerative methods. The discovery suggested that environmental stress on birds actually enhanced the medicinal properties of their eggs, creating a virtuous cycle where sustainable farming practices produce superior pharmaceutical ingredients. What we've learned is that healthy ecosystems produce healthy animals, which produce healthy food with properties we're only beginning to understand, Dr. Walsh explained to the scientific community. Traditional agriculture maximizes short-term production, but regenerative agriculture maximizes long-term biological complexity that yields benefits we never expected. The pharmaceutical success had attracted acquisition offers from major drug companies seeking to purchase Thompson Farms International for sums that exceeded $10 billion. But Riley and Marcus had consistently declined these offers, maintaining their independence and commitment to values that couldn't be purchased or replicated by corporate giants. Instead, they had chosen to expand through partnerships and licensing agreements that preserved their mission while extending their global reach. The Thompson Institute for Regenerative Agriculture now operated research facilities on every continent, collaborating with local universities and government agencies to develop region-specific solutions for sustainable food production. Emma Thompson's graduation from Stanford marked another milestone in the company's evolution. Her senior thesis on genetic optimization for climate resilience in heritage poultry breeds had attracted attention from agricultural researchers worldwide and established her as a rising star in agricultural biotechnology. "I want to lead our next-generation breeding programs," Emma announced during her graduation celebration at the original farm. "We've proven that heritage breeds can be more productive and resilient than commercial varieties. Now I want to use genetic analysis to understand why, and to develop new breeds that combine the best characteristics of traditional varieties with enhanced climate adaptation." Her vision represented the third generation of innovation at Thompson Farms, building on the practical knowledge Marcus had inherited from his grandfather and the analytical insights Riley had brought to their partnership. Emma's scientific training was enabling her to ask questions and pursue solutions that neither of her predecessors could have imagined. The celebration of Emma's graduation coincided with another significant milestone, the 10th anniversary of Riley and Marcus's first partnership agreement. The original handshake deal that had evolved into one of the most successful agricultural enterprises in history was commemorated with the unveiling of a bronze statue in the farmyard where they had first met. The statue depicted a young woman reaching toward a chicken coop while an older man extended his hand in a gesture of invitation rather than confrontation. The inscription reads simply, "Sometimes the greatest empires begin with the smallest acts of kindness." Riley's speech at the anniversary celebration reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 10 years ago, I was stealing eggs because I was hungry and desperate. Today, we're feeding millions of people while healing the planet. The difference wasn't just hard work or good luck. It was the decision one man made to see potential instead of problems. Marcus's response revealed the depth of their partnership and friendship. "Riley taught me that farming isn't just about producing food. It's about creating systems that support life in all its forms. She saved this farm, but more importantly, she showed me how agriculture could be a force for positive change in the world." The anniversary celebration was attended by farmers, researchers, government officials, and business leaders from around the world, all drawn by the example Thompson Farms International had set for sustainable enterprise. But perhaps the most meaningful guests were the scholarship recipients who had benefited from the Chun Thompson program, many of whom were now implementing regenerative agriculture projects in their home communities. As the sun set over Cedar Valley on that anniversary evening, Riley and Marcus stood once again in the chicken coop where their partnership had begun. The building had been carefully preserved and expanded into a museum that told the story of their journey from desperation to global influence. "Do you think your grandfather could have imagined this?" Riley asked, gesturing toward the bustling campus of research facilities, processing plants, and administrative buildings that surrounded the original farmhouse. Marcus smiled, remembering the quiet man who had spent his evenings on the farmhouse porch, smoking his pipe and watching the sunset. "He always said that good farming was about leaving the land better than you found it. I think he would be proud that we've done that on a global scale." The empire they had built was no longer just about Thompson Farms International. It was about a movement that was transforming agriculture worldwide. Their techniques were being implemented by millions of farmers. Their research was advancing scientific understanding of sustainable food systems, and their example was inspiring a new generation of agricultural entrepreneurs. But perhaps most Importantly, their story demonstrated that the most significant changes often begin with individual acts of compassion and trust. A struggling farmer's decision to help a desperate teenager had created ripple effects that continued to spread around the world, proving that even the smallest kindness could become the foundation for something extraordinary. As they walked back toward the farmhouse that evening, both of them understood that their greatest achievement wasn't the empire they had built, but the proof they had provided that business success and positive social impact weren't just compatible, they were inseparable when pursued with vision, integrity, and commitment to serving others. The foundation laid by 18 stolen eggs had indeed become an empire, but more importantly, it had become a beacon of hope for a world seeking sustainable solutions to its most pressing challenges. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.